The howling wind cut through my thin cotton dress like a knife as I stumbled forward, each step sinking deeper into the unforgiving snow. My fingers had long since gone numb, my lips blue with cold. The wagon train had left 3 days ago, left me behind when fever took hold, and they feared I would slow them down, or worse, bring death to their children. "She's as good as gone anyway," I heard them whisper as consciousness faded in and out. They took my supplies, my horse, everything but the clothes on my back, and a single blanket now frozen stiff around my shoulders. "Please," I whispered, though there was no one to hear my prayers in this vast, white emptiness of the Colorado Territory. "I don't want to die alone." The year was 1858, and I, Martha Wilson, had foolishly believed that heading west would bring new beginnings after losing my family to cholera back east. Instead, it had brought me here, abandoned, freezing, with the setting sun promising that this night would likely be my last on this earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I don't recall falling. One moment I was trudging forward, the next I was face down in the snow, too weak to rise. The cold began to feel almost comforting then, a warmth spreading through me that I dimly recognized as death's embrace. My eyes grew heavy, and I thought of my mother's face, wondering if I might see her soon. That's when I heard them, hoofbeats cutting through the silence, voices speaking in a language I'd never heard before. I forced my eyes open as shadows fell across me. 3 men on horseback, their faces stern beneath wide-brimmed hats, their dark eyes regarding me with surprise and what I hoped was concern. "American woman," one said in broken English, dismounting and approaching cautiously. "Why alone? Where? People?" I tried to speak, to explain, but my voice was gone, stolen by cold and thirst. The man knelt beside me, his expression unreadable as he assessed my condition. Then he spoke rapidly to his companions in their native tongue. I flinched when he reached for me, years of warnings about savage Indians flooding my mind. But what choice did I have? Death was certain if I remained. "I help," he said simply, and before I could respond, he had lifted me onto his horse and mounted behind me. The warmth of another human body was so shocking after days alone in the cold that tears sprang to my eyes, instantly freezing on my cheeks. As we rode, I drifted, in and out of consciousness, aware only of strong arms keeping me from falling and the rhythmic motion of the horse beneath us. I didn't know if I was being rescued or if something worse awaited me, but in that moment I was simply grateful not to die alone in the snow. The journey seemed endless, though it couldn't have been more than a few hours. When finally we stopped, I was barely conscious, but I registered the glow of firelight, the sound of voices, and then many hands lifting me, carrying me into blessed warmth. I awoke sometime later on a bed of soft furs, a fire crackling nearby. An elderly woman knelt beside me, pressing a warm liquid to my lips. I drank greedily, the herbal tea bringing life back to my frozen body. As awareness returned, I realized I was in a hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling I had only heard described by travelers. "Where am I?" I managed to whisper. The woman didn't understand my words, but she smiled gently, patting my hand before rising to speak to someone beyond my field of vision. A moment later, the man who had found me appeared, his tall figure silhouetted against the firelight. "You safe," he said. "This Diné land, my people." Diné, I would later learn, was what the Navajo called themselves, the people. And the man who had saved me was not just any warrior, but Hastin Toha Hidlini, chief flowing water in your language, leader of this band. "Why did you help me?" I asked, my voice still weak. "Your people and mine are not friends." He regarded me for a long moment before answering. "All people same under sky. No one should die alone in snow." Such simple words, yet they contained more humanity than I had experienced from my own kind who had left me to die. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by emotion and exhaustion. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we talk more." And so began my life among the Diné, a life I never could have imagined when I set out from Boston with dreams of California gold. The women of the tribe nursed me back to health, treating my frostbitten fingers and toes with poultices of herbs and pine sap. They clothed me in warm deerskin and taught me to eat their food, dishes of corn and beans, and sometimes rabbit stew rich with wild onions. For weeks I existed in a state of constant fear, waiting for the cruelty I had been told was inevitable. Instead, I found only curiosity and sometimes kindness. The children especially were fascinated by my pale skin and light brown hair, often touching it wonderingly when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Hastien Toahidliini visited daily, bringing small gifts, a wooden comb, a clay cup, a blanket woven with intricate patterns. Each time he would sit across the fire from me and attempt conversation, his English limited but improving with practice. "Why white people leave you?" he asked one evening, his dark eyes serious in the firelight. I hesitated, shame washing over me. I was sick with fever. They thought I would die anyway or make others sick. They couldn't wait. Winter was coming. And they needed to cross the mountains. He was silent for a long moment, considering my words. "Your people value journey more than life?" The question struck me like a physical blow. I had never thought of it that way, but he was right. The wagon master had calculated the value of one sick woman against the progress of his train and found me wanting. "I suppose they do," I answered finally. "Diné not leave sick behind," he said simply. "All must reach home together, or journey has no meaning." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the high desert, I grew stronger. The women taught me their ways, how to grind corn between stones, how to weave baskets so tight they could hold water, how to find edible plants among what looked to my untrained eye like useless scrub. I learned bits of their language, enough to thank them and ask simple questions. What I didn't understand was why I was still here. Surely a trading post or fort existed somewhere nearby where they could have sent me. When I finally asked Hastien, "Toahidliini?" This question, his answer, surprised me. "You wish to leave?" he asked, something like hurt flashing briefly in his eyes. "No," I said quickly, realizing with some shock that it was true. "But I don't understand why you keep me here." "You have nowhere," he said simply. "No family waits. No home stands empty. Until you find path, this can be home." I stared at him, speechless. He was right. I had nowhere to go, no one waiting for my return. The wagon train that abandoned me was long gone, and even if I somehow made it to California, what awaited me there? I'd been traveling with distant cousins who clearly valued my life little enough to leave me behind. That night, as I lay on my bed of furs listening to the sounds of the camp settling for the night, I realized something that both frightened and exhilarated me. I was beginning to feel more at home among these savages than I ever had among my own people. The following day, as I was helping the women tan hides, a smelly, difficult process I was only beginning to master, Hastien Toahidliini approached, his expression more serious than usual. "Scouts bring news," he said without preamble. "Bluecoats come, soldiers." My heart leaped. American soldiers meant a chance to return to my own kind, to civilization with its familiar ways and language. Yet the thought filled me with unexpected dread. "They will take you if they find you here," he continued. "Say we stole you, use as reason for war." I had heard enough about Indian-white relations to know he was right. A white woman living among the Navajo would be assumed kidnapped. not rescued. The soldiers wouldn't believe or care about the truth. What will you do? I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. What will you do, Martha Wilson? You can go with soldiers, return to your people. Or, I prompted when he fell silent. Or you can become Dine, he said quietly, fully, as wife. I gasped, unable to hide my shock. Wife? To whom? His gaze didn't waver. To me? The world seemed to stop around us, the chatter of women, the laughter of children, the distant cry of an eagle all fading to silence as I processed his words. This man, this leader of his people, was offering me protection the only way he could, through marriage. If you are my wife, not captive, soldiers have no cause against us, he explained. You choose freely, they cannot take you. But you must. Choose now. Scouts say blue coats 2 days ride away. 2 days. 48 hours to decide the entire course of my life. I need time to think, I whispered. He nodded once. Until morning. Then you must decide. Return to people who left you. To die or stay with people who saved you. As he walked away, I sank to the ground, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Marriage to an Indian chief? It was unthinkable, forbidden. If I ever returned to white society afterward, I would be an outcast, possibly worse. Yet, the alternative, returning to a world that had quite literally left me to die, held little appeal. And there was something else, something I scarcely dared acknowledge, even to myself. In the months I had spent recovering among the Dine, I had come to admire Hastien Toahidlini, his quiet strength, his wisdom, his unfailing kindness, not just to me, but to all his people. That night I barely slept, my mind racing with impossible choices. By dawn, exhausted but resolute, I had made my decision, one that would forever change not just my fate, but that of 2 peoples locked in a conflict neither fully understood. Little did I know that my choice would lead to both great joy and terrible sorrow, to love beyond anything I had imagined possible, and loss that would nearly destroy me. But as the sun broke over the mesas, painting the world in gold and shadow, I rose to find Hastien Toahidlini and give him my answer, one that would echo across the years and generations to come. I stood before Hastien Toahidlini as the first light of dawn painted the distant mesas. My heart thundered in my chest, but my voice remained steady when I spoke. I will stay, I said simply. I will become your wife. Something shifted. In his eyes, relief perhaps, or something deeper that I couldn't yet name. He nodded once, his broad shoulders relaxing almost imperceptibly. You make wise choice, he said. Not easy choice, but wise. He was right. Nothing about this decision had been easy. Throughout that sleepless night, I'd wrestled with everything I'd been taught about propriety, race, and my place in the world. In Boston, ladies of good breeding didn't marry outside their social circles, let alone outside their race. Such a union would bring shame, ostracism, perhaps even violence. But Boston was a world away. Here, in this harsh but beautiful land, different rules applied, survival, loyalty, and the simple truth that this man and his people had saved me when my own kind left me to die. What happens now? I asked, suddenly aware of how little I knew. About Navajo marriage customs. Today we prepare, tomorrow we join. He gestured toward a group of women who had gathered nearby, watching our exchange with undisguised interest. They will help you understand our ways. As he walked away, the women surrounded me, their faces alight with excitement. The eldest, Grey Willow woman, took my hands in hers. Though we shared few words in common, she'd been my most patient teacher during my months of recovery. Come, she said in halting English, make ready. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. The women led me to a small spring-fed pool where they instructed me to bathe, providing sweet-smelling herbs to wash my hair and skin. They brought a dress finer than any I'd seen in the camp. Soft deer skin, elaborately decorated with porcupine quills, dyed in brilliant reds and blues. They combed and braided my hair with reverent care, weaving in small silver beads that caught the light when I moved. Throughout these preparations, the women chatted among themselves, occasionally translating bits of their conversation. I learned that Hastien Toahidlini had been widowed 3 winters past, his wife lost to the same fever that had nearly claimed me. They told me he was respected not just for his courage in battle, but for his wisdom in council, how he had kept peace with neighboring tribes through diplomacy rather than bloodshed. "He good man," Grey Willow Woman told me as she fastened a necklace of polished stones around my neck. "Strong heart, kind hands." She paused, her weathered face growing serious. "He save you twice now." I understood her meaning. First, he had rescued me from death in the snow. Now, by making me his wife, he would save me from being taken by the soldiers, and possibly save his people from conflict as well. As the day progressed, I began to notice changes in the camp. The men dismantled several hogans, packing belongings onto travois. Children rounded up sheep and goats. It soon became clear that the entire band was preparing to move. When I questioned Grey Willow Woman about this, she explained that we would travel to a more remote canyon before the soldiers arrived, not fleeing in fear, but making a strategic retreat to avoid unnecessary confrontation. There, in the shadow of sacred cliffs, Hastien Toahidlini and I would be joined according to Diné tradition. That evening, as the camp settled into the quiet rhythms of approaching night, he came to sit beside me at the fire. For a long while, we watched the flames in companionable silence. "I know this, not what you dreamed," he said finally, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Not husband you imagined when you left your eastern home?" The simple truth of his words caught me off guard. No, he was not the husband I had imagined. In my girlhood fantasies, I had seen myself with a prosperous merchant or perhaps a lawyer, someone in a fine suit who would give me a comfortable home and respectable position in society. "Life rarely gives us what we imagine," I replied carefully. "Sometimes it gives us what we need instead." He turned to study my face, the firelight casting his strong features in bronze relief. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, Martha Wilson." "After tomorrow, will I still be Martha Wilson?" I asked. A small smile touched his lips. "To your people, always. To mine you will receive new name. Name that tells your story." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn brought clear skies and a flurry of activity as the camp was dismantled with practiced efficiency. Within hours, our small band was moving across the landscape, a colorful procession of people, animals, and travois laden with belongings. I rode beside Grey Willow Woman, who continued my education in Navajo customs between pointing out medicinal plants and telling stories about the landmarks we passed. "That place," she said, indicating a rock formation that resembled a sleeping giant. "First man sleep there when world knew, his dreams become mountains." Such stories fascinated me. So different from the rigid biblical teachings of my childhood, yet filled with their own profound wisdom and beauty. I found myself trying to see the world through these new eyes, to understand the sacred connections between earth, sky, and all living things that formed the foundation of Diné belief. By midday, we had traveled far from our previous camp, winding through narrow canyons, where ancient handprints decorated the walls, and the wind whispered secrets in a language older than words. Finally, we arrived at a sheltered valley where cottonwood trees shaded a clear stream, and natural caves offered protection from both elements and unwelcome eyes. As the camp was re-established, I was taken to a special hogan that had been transported in pieces and rebuilt with remarkable speed. Inside, Grey Willow Woman and the other women continued my preparation, explaining that the wedding ceremony would begin at sunset and continue through the night. Not like White Wedding, she told me. No priest, no paper. We make Hogan for you. And chief, you share corn, pray to holy people, walk toward east together, then you are one. Despite its simplicity, I found myself moved by the profound meaning behind each element she described. This was no mere legal contract, but a spiritual joining, witnessed by ancestors and blessed by forces beyond human understanding. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in deepening shades of gold and crimson, Grey Willow Woman brought a ceramic bowl filled with a dark liquid. Drink, she instructed. Purify body, prepare spirit. The bitter tea made my head swim slightly, not unpleasantly. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct. When Hastin Toahidliini appeared at the Hogan entrance, his presence filled the small space like a physical force. He had transformed as well, wearing a chief's full regalia, a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers, a buckskin shirt decorated with intricate beadwork depicting his achievements, leggings fringed with small bells that made soft music when he moved. Around his neck hung medallions of silver and turquoise that caught the fading light. "It is time," he said, extending his hand to me. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Together we walked to the center of the camp, where the entire band had gathered in a circle. An elderly man I recognized as the tribe's medicine man awaited us, his face painted with symbols whose meaning I could only guess at. Beside him burned a small fire of fragrant cedar and saga. What followed was unlike anything I had experienced before. The medicine man chanted in the ancient language of his people, his voice rising and falling like the wind itself. Hastin Toahidliini and I were seated on a blanket woven with symbols of union and fertility. A perfect ear of white corn was placed in my hands, a perfect ear of yellow corn in his. "Corn is life," Grey Willow Woman whispered, translating. "Woman is white corn, man is yellow corn. Together make all life possible." We exchanged the corn, then shared a drink of clear water from a ceremonial wedding basket. The medicine man tied our hands together with a sacred cord, binding us physically as we were being bound spiritually. Throughout the ceremony, people sang songs of blessing and celebration, their voices blending in harmonies that seemed to vibrate through the very stones beneath us. As darkness fell completely, stars appearing like scattered jewels across the vast canvas of the sky, the medicine man instructed us to walk toward the east, toward the place where the sun would rise to begin our new life together. Each step we took was heavy with significance, each breath a prayer for harmony and prosperity. When we returned to the circle, Hastin Toahidliini turned to face the assembled tribe. He spoke at length in their language, his deep voice carrying easily to the farthest listeners. Though I couldn't understand his words, I could feel their power, the solemnity of promises being made. Then he turned to me, switching to English so I would understand. "I, Hastin Toahidliini, take you as wife under stars and before my people. I promise to hunt for you, to build shelter for you, to protect you from harm, to walk beside you until death separates our paths." The simplicity and directness of his vow brought unexpected tears to my eyes. There was no mention of obedience or submission, only partnership and protection. When the medicine man nodded to me, I found my voice. "I, Martha Wilson," I began, then paused. This moment marked a crossing from which there would be no return. I took a deep breath and continued. "I take you as husband, under these same stars and before these witnesses. I promise to keep your home, to honor your ways, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to walk your path as my own until death calls me elsewhere." The medicine man raised his hands toward the heavens, calling out in a voice that seemed to reach beyond the physical world. The people responded with a shout of celebration, and suddenly the solemn ceremony transformed into a feast of joy. Drums appeared, along with flutes made of river cane. The circle widened as dancers moved within it, their movements telling stories of creation, growth, and renewal. As we sat side by side, accepting gifts and blessings from each family, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was not the life I had planned, but perhaps it was the life I was meant to find. These people who had once been strangers, whose ways had seemed alien and frightening, had become my people. This man beside me, whose language and beliefs were still largely mysteries to me, had become my husband. Later, as we walked to our wedding hogan, beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Hastien Toa Hidliini stopped suddenly, taking both my hands in his. "Now you have new name," he said. "Among Dine you are Azomon Twaniahi." I struggled to repeat the unfamiliar sounds, making him smile. "It means woman saved from darkness," he translated, "but also means woman who brings light." The double meaning touched me deeply. In saving me from death in the snow, he had given me life. But perhaps in some way I couldn't yet fully understand, my presence among his people might bring light. As well, a bridge between two worlds, locked in misunderstanding and conflict. As we ducked into the wedding hogan, freshly strewn with sweet-smelling pine boughs and soft furs, I realized that despite the strangeness of this union, despite all the uncertainty that lay ahead, I felt something I had not expected. Not just gratitude or respect for this man, but the first delicate tendrils of what might someday grow into love. Little did I know that the very next day would test that fragile bond in ways I could never have imagined, bringing danger not just to me, but to the entire tribe that had taken me as their own. I awoke to urgent voices and the pounding of hooves. For a moment, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness, I forgot where I was. The unfamiliar sense of sage and pinyon, the feel of fur beneath me instead of cotton sheets. Then memory rushed. Back, the wedding ceremony. My new husband, our first night together as man and wife. Hastien Toa Hidliini was already up, pulling on his buckskin leggings with swift, practiced movements. His face, so gentle in the firelight hours before, had hardened into a mask of concentration. "What is it?" I asked, clutching the blanket to my chest. "Scouts return," he said tersely. "Blue coats closer than we thought. Find our old camp already." My stomach clenched with fear. "They're tracking us," he nodded grimly. "Good trackers with them, Indian scouts who sell their eyes to white men for metal coins and whiskey." His voice held no judgment, only a deep sadness. "Many tribes hungry now. Easy to buy loyalty with full belly." Outside, the camp had erupted into controlled chaos. Women packed essential belongings, while men gathered weapons and prepared horses. Children, sensing the tension, moved with unusual quiet, helping where they could without being told. Grey Willow. Woman appeared at our doorway, her usually calm face lined with worry. She spoke rapidly to Hastien Toa Hidliini in their language, her gnarled hands gesturing expressively. He responded with short, decisive phrases, then turned to me. "You must dress quickly," he said. "We separate camp. Women, children, elders go deeper into canyon lands. Men stay, talk to soldiers." "Separate?" I echoed, panic rising in my throat. "But I should stay with you. I can explain to the soldiers that I'm here willingly, that you saved my life." His expression softened momentarily as he touched my cheek. "Blue coats not come to listen, Azomon Twaniahi. They come to count coup. If find white woman, they not ask if she happy. They take, then burn our homes for stealing you." "But that's not what happened," I protested. Truth matters little when men already decide what they believe, he replied. With a wisdom born of bitter experience. You go with women, stay safe. If soldiers leave peaceful, I send for you. If not, he left the sentence unfinished, but I understood the implication all too clearly. Grey Willow Woman helped me dress in practical clothing. A simple deerskin dress, moccasins well suited for rough terrain, a rabbit fur cloak against the morning chill. As I stepped outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, revealing the flurry of activity around me. Hastien To'ahidliini stood with his warriors, 20 strong men armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and a few precious rifles acquired through trade. They would remain to confront the soldiers, to protect the retreat of the more vulnerable members of the tribe, a diversionary tactic as old as warfare itself. He approached me one last time before we parted, pressing something into my palm, a small pouch of soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork. "Medicine bundle," he explained, "for protection." I clutched it tightly, fighting back tears. We had been married less than a day, and already forces beyond our control were tearing us apart. "How will I find you again?" "I find you," he promised, "always." With those words, he helped me onto a sturdy pinto pony and stepped back, his face once again the impassive mask of a chief preparing for possible battle. Only his eyes betrayed his emotion, dark pools of concern and something deeper that made my heart ache. Grey Willow Woman led our group, 12 women, 9 children, and 3 elderly men too old to fight, but whose knowledge of the hidden canyons would guide our escape. We moved out silently, heading west initially to hide our true direction before turning south toward the maze-like canyons that had sheltered the Diné for generations. I looked back once to see Hastien To'ahidliini still watching, his tall figure silhouetted against the lightening sky. Then we rounded a bend in the trail, and he was gone from sight, though not from my thoughts. We traveled hard through that day, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or allow the youngest, children and oldest elders to catch their breath. Grey Willow Woman set a punishing pace, her ancient face set with determination as she led us deeper into territory that few white people had ever seen, let alone mapped. The landscape changed as we traveled, the open desert giving way to towering sandstone formations that glowed red and orange in the sunlight. Narrow slots opened between massive cliffs, barely wide enough for a single horse to pass. These led to hidden valleys where springs bubbled up from mysterious underground sources, creating oases of green amid the arid wilderness. By midday, even, I could tell we were following a route designed to confuse pursuers, doubling back occasionally, crossing bare stone that would hold no tracks, wading through shallow streams to mask our scent and direction. The children, remarkably, made no complaint despite the difficult journey. Even the smallest, a boy of perhaps 4 years, maintained stoic silence as he rode before his grandmother on her aging mare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Grey Willow Woman finally called a halt in a sheltered box canyon. A small spring provided fresh water, and the steep walls offered both protection and vantage points from which sentries could watch our back trail. The women established camp with practiced efficiency, setting up temporary shelters, building small, nearly smokeless fires, preparing a simple meal of pemmican and wild greens gathered along our route. I tried to help, but my skills were still rudimentary compared to theirs. Instead, I found myself assigned to watch the younger children, who had finally been given permission to release some of their pent-up energy. As darkness fell, bringing with it the desert's bitter cold, I sat wrapped in my cloak, staring into the dying embers of our fire. No one spoke of what might be happening back at the camp. No one needed to. The worry was etched on every face, visible in the way the women's eyes constantly strayed toward the canyon entrance, in how they kept the children close despite the apparent safety of our hiding place. Grey Willow Woman settled beside me, her gnarled hands busy with some endless weaving, even in the dim light. For a long while she said nothing, the clickety-clack of her bone needles the only sound between us. "You fear for him," she said finally, her voice soft in the darkness. "Yes," I admitted, "and for all of them." She nodded, as if my concern confirmed. "Something important. Good. Fear shows open heart. Closed heart feels nothing. Will they be all right?" I asked, knowing she couldn't possibly answer yet needing to ask anyway. Instead of empty reassurances, she gave me truth. "Not no. Soldiers have many guns, much anger, but our men have wisdom of land, protection of ancestors." She set aside, her weaving to look at me directly. "Hastin Toa Hidliini, strong leader, smart warrior. If way exists to find peace, he find it. And if there is no way to peace." I couldn't keep the tremor from my voice. Her weathered face remained impassive, but her eyes held ancient sorrow. "Then he die with honor, as warrior should. And you," she touched my hand lightly, "you become part of us forever. Blood of our blood, no longer outsider." The realization struck me then. These people who had once been strangers now considered me one of them. If the worst happened, if Hastin Toa Hidliini and his warriors fell to the soldiers' guns, I wouldn't be cast out. I would be embraced, protected, my place among them secured by the very ceremony that had bound me to their chief. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of gunfire and blood-soaked sand. I awoke before dawn to find the camp already stirring, women packing up our meager temporary settlement in the dim pre-morning light. "We move again," Grey Willow Woman informed me as she handed me a strip of dried meat for breakfast. "Go deeper, safer place." "Has there been news?" I asked, searching her face for some clue. She shook her head. "Too soon, but better not stay. One place long, soldiers have horses, determination." Just as we were preparing to depart, a shadow appeared at the canyon entrance, a lone figure on horseback. Instantly the women formed a protective circle around the children, the few weapons they carried at the ready. I found myself pulled into the center of this living fortress, despite my attempts to see who approached. The rider came forward slowly, hands raised to show peaceful intentions. As he drew closer, I recognized one of the younger warriors from our band, a man called Swift Fox. Relief surged through the gathered women, followed immediately by anxious questions about the fate of husbands, brothers, and sons. Swift Fox dismounted, his face grave as he addressed the group in their language. Though I couldn't understand his words, the reactions told me enough. Sighs of relief, murmurs of thanksgiving to their deities, a few muffled sobs quickly controlled. When he finished speaking to the group, he approached me directly. "Chief, Zenmi," he said in halting English, "say tell his wife all is well." "The soldiers?" I asked eagerly. "What happened?" Swift Fox's expression remained neutral. "Soldiers come, many soldiers with big guns. Chief show them empty camp, say we move for better hunting. They ask about white woman. Chief say no white woman here, only Dene." And they believed him? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. A ghost of a smile touched the young warrior's lips. "Chief what word? Convincing. Also, soldiers not want fight if not have to. Too few, too far from fort." His expression darkened slightly. "But they say come back. Say white settlers. Want our land for sheep, for mining. Say we must go to reservation soon or be forced." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The word reservation sent a chill through me. Even in the East, I had heard stories of tribes relocated to barren lands, far from their ancestral homes. of promises broken almost before the ink on treaties had dried. "When can we return to camp?" I asked, pushing aside these darker thoughts. "For the moment. Soon. Chief say wait one more day. Make sure soldiers truly gone, not just hiding to follow." Swift Fox remounted his horse. "I go now. Tell Chief all safe here." As he rode away, disappearing into the twisting canyon passages, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that there had been no violence, anticipation of reunion with my new husband, and growing unease about what the soldiers' warning might mean for our future. True to Swift Fox's word, we remained in hiding another full day and night. The children, who had been remarkably stoic during our flight, began to grow restless in the confined space of the canyon. The women invented games to occupy them, and I found myself drawn into these activities, learning songs and simple phrases in their language as we waited. Grey Willow Woman proved an exacting but patient teacher, correcting my pronunciation with gentle persistence. "Words have power," she explained. "Say wrong, power goes wrong direction." By the time the signal came for our return, 3 short whistle blasts echoing down the canyon walls, I had added dozens of Diné words to my growing vocabulary. Not enough for complex conversation, but enough to express basic needs and understanding. The journey back to camp was more leisurely than our frightened flight had been. The children rode double on the horses, singing songs that bounced off the canyon walls. The women's faces had softened, the tight lines of worry replaced by relief and anticipation of reunion. I found myself caught in a strange mixture of emotions, eager to see Hastintoa Hidlini again, yet uncertain about what our relationship would become now that immediate danger had passed. Our wedding night had been tender, respectful, but marked by the restraint of 2 people, still largely unknown to each other. What would growing into true marriage mean in this context, in this culture so different from my own? The camp appeared. Different upon our return, smaller, more compact, with fewer hogans and more temporary shelters. It took me a moment to realize why. Many of the possessions left behind in our hasty departure were missing, either taken by the soldiers as evidence or deliberately destroyed. Hastintoa Hidlini awaited our arrival at the center of this diminished settlement, standing tall and proud despite the signs of tension around him. When his eyes found mine among the returning group, something in his stoic expression softened momentarily. He stepped forward to help me dismount, his strong hands gentle at my waist. "You return safely," he said, and though his words were simple, I heard layers of relief beneath them. "As do you," I replied, searching his face for signs of what had truly transpired with the soldiers. Swift Fox said there was no fighting. "No. Fighting with weapons," he confirmed, "only with words, sharp words, bitter like unripe berries, but no blood spilled." He gestured toward what remained of the camp. "They take some things, break others, to show power like wolf-marking territory." That night, as the tribe gathered around council fires to discuss their situation, I began to understand the true precariousness of their position. The soldiers' visit had been more than routine patrol or random harassment. It represented a harbinger of changes sweeping across the territory. Gold had been discovered in the mountains to the north, bringing waves of prospectors and settlers. The government, pressed by these newcomers' demands for land and security, was increasingly determined to solve the Indian problem by confining all tribes to designated reservations. "They say we must go to Bosque Redondo," one of the elders explained, his face a mask of disgust. "Walk 300 miles to live on land where nothing grows, where our children will sicken and die." "Others have already gone," another added, forced at gunpoint, their hogans burned behind them. I listened with growing horror, my presence among them suddenly taking on new significance. As Hastintoa Hidlini's wife, a white woman who had chosen to join the tribe, I represented a potential complication to the government's plans. My story, if believed, contradicted the narrative of savages who needed to be controlled and contained for the safety of white settlers. When the council fire had burned low, and most of the tribe had retired to their shelters, Hastin to ahidliini, and I remained watching the dying embers cast shifting shadows across the sand. I brought danger to your people by staying, I said softly. He shook his head. Danger was already coming, like storm clouds gathering on horizon. You are not cause, only... He searched for the right word. Catalyst. Make slow thing happen faster, perhaps. What will you do? I asked. His gaze remained on the glowing coals. Council divided. Some say fight, die with weapons in hand, rather than starve slowly on reservation. Others say surrender, hope government keeps promises this time. A bitter smile touched his lips. Those who say this have not read treaties broken before ink. Dries. And you? What do you believe? He was silent for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of responsibility. I believe we must find third path. Not war, which we cannot win against. So many. Not surrender, which is slow death of spirit. We must find way to keep our freedom, our traditions, while world changes around us. He turned to look at me then, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of the fire. Perhaps you part of that path, as Jomontoa Niahi, woman who walks between worlds. I felt the enormity of that possibility settle over me like a mantle, not just a wife, not just a curiosity, but potentially a bridge between peoples locked in deadly misunderstanding. It was a role I'd never sought, a responsibility I'd never imagined when I set out from Boston with dreams of California gold. Yet as I looked into my husband's face, saw the quiet strength, the intelligence, the deep concern for his people that defined him, I knew I could not turn away from whatever part fate had assigned me in this unfolding drama. I will help however I can, I promised, reaching for his hand, his fingers intertwined with mine, warm and strong in the desert night. I know, he said simply. This why I knew you were meant to live when I found you in snow. This why I asked you to be my wife. The realization dawned slowly. His proposal had not been merely about protecting me from the soldiers, nor simply about giving me a place among his people. He had seen something in me that I had not yet recognized in myself, a potential purpose larger than my own survival. As we walked together to our hogan, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, I felt both humbled by the trust he had placed in me and terrified of failing to live up to it. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, fraught with dangers I could only begin to imagine. Yet for the first time since being abandoned in the snow, I felt a sense of clarity about my place in the world. Whatever came next, whether conflict or compromise, tragedy or triumph, I would face it not as Martha Wilson, lost and alone, but as Jomontoa Niahi, woman saved from darkness, standing beside the man who had given me both life and purpose when all seemed lost. Little did I know that our greatest challenges lay not in the threats from outside, but in the journey of the heart that had only just begun. A journey that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and love, in ways no treaty or battle ever could. Spring gave way to summer with brutal swiftness in the canyon lands. One day, the mornings held lingering crispness. The next, heat shimmered across the landscape by mid-morning, driving us to seek shade during the fiercest hours of sunlight. I had begun to settle into the rhythms of Diné life, rising before dawn, grinding corn between stones worn smooth by generations of women's hands, learning to weave on a loom constructed of juniper branches and sinew. My hands, once soft and pale from a life of relative comfort, had grown calloused and sun-browned. My skin no longer blistered in the harsh sunlight, but had taken on a golden hue that, while still lighter than that of the Diné, marked me as someone who lived beneath the open sky rather than within walls of wood and plaster. But it was more than my outward appearance that had changed. Something deep within me was transforming, like a river slowly carving a new channel through resistant stone. "Your eyes different now," Grey Willow Woman observed one afternoon as we worked side by side, preparing a herbal remedy for a child's fever. "When you come, eyes always looking backward. Now they look here, sometimes forward." I considered her words as I crushed juniper berries with a smooth riverstone, releasing their sharp, cleansing scent. She was right. The paralyzing grief and shock that had accompanied me into this new life had gradually given way to something else. Not exactly contentment, but perhaps purpose. "I'm learning to be present," I replied, searching for words to explain the change. In Boston, we were always planning for tomorrow or regretting yesterday. Here, each day demands your full attention just to survive. Grey Willow Woman nodded, approvingly. This wisdom of Dene Way, yesterday gone like smoke, tomorrow maybe never come, today all we have for certain. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of camp, horses arriving, men's voices raised in greeting. My heart quickened. Hastin To Ahidliini had been gone for nearly 2 weeks, traveling with several warriors to meet, with neighboring bands, seeking allies in the face of growing pressure from white settlers and the army. I set aside my work and rose, shading my eyes against the afternoon glare. 5 riders approached, dust rising from their horses' hooves like earthbound clouds. With a jolt of recognition, I spotted my husband's distinctive silhouette, his straight-backed posture and broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. But something was wrong. The men rode slowly, their usual energetic return replaced by a heavy weariness I could sense even before they dismounted. When Hastin To Ahidliini swung down from his horse, I saw that his face was drawn, new lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks before. I stepped forward, suddenly self-conscious. Among the Dene, public displays of affection between husband and wife were considered inappropriate. Our greetings typically remained formal until we were in the privacy of our hogan. But today, something in his expression made me break protocol, moving to his side and touching his arm lightly. "What happened?" I asked softly. His eyes met mine, dark with a sorrow that made my stomach clench. "News travels across the land," he said. "Bad news, carried on the wind." He would say no more until the council gathered that evening. As the sun sank below the western mesas, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, the tribe assembled around the central fire. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their usual playfulness subdued to watchful silence. Hastin To Ahidliini stood before his people, the firelight casting his face in stark relief. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains. "Our brothers to the north have been broken," he began. "The soldiers came with many guns, many horses. They surrounded the camp while people slept, demanded surrender. When warriors resisted, bluecoats opened fire. Many died, men, women, children. Those who lived were forced to walk toward Bosque Redondo. Already 30 have died on the journey. More will follow." A murmur of distress rippled through the gathered Dene. I felt sick, imagining the scene he described. Families awakened by gunfire, the confusion and terror, the brutal march across inhospitable terrain. "The white government speaks with forked tongue," continued one of the warriors who had traveled with my husband. "They signed treaty with one hand while loading guns with other. They promise land as long as grass grows and rivers flow, then take it when yellow metal is found beneath." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I listened with growing horror, understanding now why my husband had returned so changed. This wasn't merely a threat anymore. It was a reality advancing toward us like a dust storm on the horizon, impossible to outrun or avoid. "What of the other bands?" asked an elder. "Do they fight or surrender?" "Some fight," Hastintoa Hidlini answered. "Some hide deeper in canyons. Some walk to reservation, hoping promises of food and protection prove true this time." His voice carried no judgment for any of these choices, only acknowledgement of the impossible situation facing all Diné and us. The question came from a young warrior barely out of boyhood, his face still unlined by time, but his eyes already old from what he had witnessed. "What will we do, Chief?" Every gaze turned to Hastintoa Hidlini. In that moment, I felt the terrible weight of leadership he carried, responsibility for every life in our band, every child, every elder. Whatever he decided would determine not just his fate, but all of ours. His eyes found mine across the fire, and in them I read a question, perhaps even a plea. I gave a small nod, somehow understanding what he was asking of me without words being necessary. "Tonight we consider all paths," he said finally. "Tomorrow we decide, but first I ask my wife to speak. She knows the white man's ways, his thoughts. Her words may help us find the best trail through dangerous lands." A shock ran through me as all eyes turned in my direction. In the 6 months since joining the tribe, I had never been asked to address the council. Women could speak, yes, but typically only the eldest and most respected offered opinions in such gatherings. I rose slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. What could I possibly say that would help these people who had taken me in, who now looked to me for insights into the very culture that threatened their existence? "I cannot claim to understand all the ways of white men," I began hesitantly. "I was just one woman among many, with little power or influence. But I know this: the government in Washington sits far away, making decisions about lands they've never seen and people they've never met." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "The soldiers who come are following orders. Some take pleasure in cruelty, yes, but others merely do what they're told, believing they bring civilization and progress. They've been taught that your ways are primitive, your beliefs superstition." A murmur of displeasure rippled through the gathering, but I continued. "This ignorance is their weakness. They expect you to either fight like warriors and die, or surrender like children and fade away. They cannot imagine a third path." "What third path exists when enemy has more guns, more men, control of water and hunting grounds?" asked an elder, his skepticism evident. I took a deep breath. "Adaptation," I said. "Not surrender, not war, but strategic change. The white man's world is coming whether we wish it or not. Those who survive will be those who learn its ways without losing their own spirit." Hastintoa Hidlini's eyes hadn't left mine. "And how would Diné do this?" "By using me," I said simply, "by letting me be your voice to the white world. I can write letters to newspapers in the East, tell your story, explain that you seek peace but will not be imprisoned. I can speak to military leaders not as a captured white woman, but as the willing wife of a respected chief." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I saw doubt on many faces, but also consideration. Grey Willow Woman nodded slowly, her ancient eyes bright with approval. "There is wisdom in these words," she said. "White woman who chooses to be Diné creates path where none existed before." Discussion erupted around the fire, some arguing passionately that my suggestion represented capitulation, others seeing the strategic value in having a mediator who understood both worlds. Throughout the heated debate, Hastintoa Hidlini remained silent, listening to each voice with equal attention. Finally, when the arguments had circled back upon themselves and the fire had burned low, he raised his hand for silence. "My wife speaks with both courage and wisdom," he said, "but decision cannot be made in one night. Each family must consider what is best, for themselves, for their children, for the generations to come. Tomorrow we will gather again and decide our path." As the council dispersed, I felt drained, uncertain whether I had helped or merely complicated an already impossible situation. Hastin Toahidliini and I walked in silence back to our hogan, the tension between us palpable. Once inside, away, from watchful eyes his formal demeanor fell away. He sank onto a pile of woven blankets, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "You disagree with what I said," I ventured, kneeling beside him. "No." He rubbed his face with his hands. A gesture I'd never seen from him before. "What you said carries truth, but truth is not always easy medicine to swallow." "Then what troubles you?" He looked at me then, his dark eyes reflecting the low light of our small cooking fire. "I wonder if I was selfish to make you my wife, to bring you into this struggle that was not yours to bear." The vulnerability in his voice struck me deeply. This was not the decisive chief who led his people with unwavering confidence, but a man tormented by doubt. "You didn't bring me into this struggle," I replied softly. "You saved me from death. Everything that followed was my choice." "Was it?" His question hung in the air between us. "When soldiers came, you had no real choice but to marry me or be taken. Now you risk becoming outcast from your own people, hated by mine if your plan fails." I moved closer, taking his hand in mine, a gesture that had become natural over the months of our marriage, evolving from formal politeness to genuine affection. "My own people left me to die in the snow," I reminded him. "They made their choice, as I've made mine." I tightened my grip on his hand, and I don't regret it. Something shifted in his expression then, the hardness of the chief giving way to the warmth of the man. Without words, he pulled me into an embrace, his arms strong around me, his heartbeat steady against my cheek. We sat like that for a long while, finding comfort in closeness, while the night wind sang its ancient song around our hogan. The following morning, as the tribe gathered once more to decide their fate, a sentry's warning cry shattered the peaceful dawn. Riders approaching, many riders coming fast. Hastin Toahidliini raced to the edge of camp, and I followed close behind. What we saw made my blood run cold. At least 30 mounted soldiers crested the ridge above our valley the morning, sun glinting off rifle barrels and brass buttons. A military detachment too large to be merely passing through. "They come for us," my husband said grimly. "Someone told them where to find our camp." "What do we do?" I asked, my heart pounding. He turned to me, his face set in lines of grim determination. "Now we see if your plan has merit, wife. You will go to them as you suggested, not as captive but as mediator." Fear coursed through me. This wasn't what I had intended. Not so soon, not without preparation. "I need time," I protested. "Letters written, contacts established." "Time is luxury we no longer possess," he cut in. "You must go now, speak with their leader. Tell him Diné wish for peace, but will not be herded like sheep to die on reservation." The reality of what he was asking hit me with physical force. I was to walk alone toward armed men who had likely been told that I was being held against my will, men primed to see my husband and his people as savages, deserving of extermination. What if they don't listen? My voice sounded strange in my own ears, thin and frightened. Hastin Toahidliini's gaze softened briefly. "Then at least we will know that all paths were tried before blood waters the earth." He touched my cheek gently. "You have strong heart, Asjomontoahniahi, stronger than you know." There was no time for proper farewells. As the soldiers descended into the valley, women hurriedly gathered children, preparing for quick escape into the canyons if negotiations failed. Warriors positioned themselves strategically, though their few weapons would prove little match for military firepower. I changed quickly into the one item of white clothing I still possessed, a simple cotton dress I'd kept folded away since my arrival, a relic of my former life. The fabric felt strange against my skin after months of soft deer skin. I unbraided my hair, letting it fall loose around my shoulders in the style of white women. Grey Willow Woman approached as I prepared to leave, pressing something into my hand, a small stone carving of a bear worn smooth by handling. "For courage," she said simply. "Bear medicine strong. Speak truth with bear's confidence." With these tokens of two worlds, my husband's medicine bundle and Grey Willow Woman's bear carving, I began the long walk across open ground toward the approaching soldiers. Behind me lay the only true home I had known since childhood. Before me, representatives of a world that now felt alien, despite having been born to it. The officer in charge raised his hand, halting his men as I approached. Alone. I could read the confusion on his face, clearly visible even at a distance. They had come expecting resistance, perhaps even combat, not a white woman in a faded dress walking calmly toward them. As I drew closer, I straightened my shoulders and raised my chin, forcing confidence into my stride that I did not feel. My heart hammered against my ribs, and my mouth had gone desert dry, but I kept moving forward. In that moment, I was neither Martha Wilson nor Azumon Tuaniahi, but something new, a bridge between worlds, walking a knife's edge between disaster and possibility. The officer spurred his horse forward to meet me, leaving his men behind. As he drew near, I could see he was younger than I expected, perhaps 30, with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes narrowed with suspicion beneath his military hat. "Ma'am?" he called, uncertainty evident in his voice. Are you being held captive here?" I stopped a few yards from his horse, planting my feet firmly on the ground that had become my home. My answer would determine the fate of everyone I had come to love. "No, Captain," I replied, my voice steadier than I had thought possible. "I am not a captive. I am Martha Wilson Toahidliini, wife of Chief Flowing Water, and I believe you and I have much to discuss about the future of our peoples." His expression of absolute shock might have been comical under different circumstances. As it was, I recognized it as the first small victory in what promised to be the most important negotiation of my life, and perhaps the most dangerous gamble any of us had ever made. I felt the weight of two worlds pressing on my shoulders as I stood before the captain, whose bewilderment had quickly transformed into suspicion. The sun beat down mercilessly, and I could feel beads of sweat forming at my temples, though whether from heat or fear I couldn't tell. "Mrs. Tawahid." He stumbled over my Navajo name, his attempt to pronounce it almost comical despite the gravity of our situation. "Wilson will do," I said, recognizing the need to make this as simple as possible for him. Behind me, I could feel the eyes of the tribe, my tribe, watching, waiting. Behind him, 30 soldiers with loaded rifles shifted restlessly on their horses. "Mrs. Wilson, I am Captain James Thornton, 5th Cavalry Regiment." His voice took on the practiced formality of military address. "We received reports of a white woman being held against her will by this band. I can see you're unharmed, but I must ask if you're speaking freely." The irony wasn't lost on me, being asked if I was free to speak by men who had come to force an entire people from their ancestral lands. "I'm speaking as freely as anyone can in this territory, Captain," I replied. "More freely, perhaps, than many." I gestured toward the camp behind me. "These people saved my life when I was abandoned by a wagon train last winter. Their chief took me as his wife, not as a captive." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Married? To an Indian?" The disgust in his voice was unmistakable, and it ignited something fierce within me. "To a man," I corrected sharply. "A leader who cares deeply for his people's welfare, just as I presume you care for your men's." The captain dismounted, perhaps recognizing this conversation required a more equal footing. Up close, I could see. He was younger than I'd first thought, probably no more than 25, with an uncomfortable newness to his uniform and a wedding band that still gleamed bright on his finger. This was a young officer with something to prove. Mrs. Wilson, regardless of your situation, I have orders to escort all Navajo in this region to Fort Defiance, from where they'll join the relocation to Bosque Redondo Reservation. His tone suggested this was a mere formality, a bureaucratic procedure rather than the death sentence I knew it to be. "And if they refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His hand moved unconsciously to the revolver at his hip. "Then I am authorized to use whatever force necessary to ensure compliance." I took a deep breath, feeling the smooth stone bear in my left hand, the medicine bundle in my right, talismans of two worlds that had somehow become equally mine. "Before you issue threats, Captain, perhaps you'd be willing to sit and listen, to hear what these people are requesting." I gentled my tone, remembering Grey Willow Woman's teaching that honey draws more flies than vinegar. Doubt flickered across his face. This clearly wasn't how he'd expected the encounter to unfold. My orders are quite clear, ma'am. And they'll still be clear after a cup of coffee," I pressed. "Surely your superiors would applaud you for attempting a peaceful resolution first, for gathering intelligence about the situation." That last bit struck home, appealing to his military sensibilities and ambition. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded curtly. 1 hour. I'll hear what they have to say, but my men remain at ready." He turned to issue orders to his lieutenant, then followed me toward the camp. As we walked, I sent up a silent prayer to both the God of my childhood and the holy people of the Dine. Never had I needed wisdom more desperately than in this moment. Hastian, Towahid Liini, met us at the edge of the camp, his face an unreadable mask of dignity. Only I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. "Captain Thornton, may I present my husband, Chief Flowing Water?" I said formally, deliberately using the English translation of his name to make him more accessible to the officer. The two men assessed each other with the wariness of wolves. From different packs, neither extending a hand in the white man's greeting, neither offering the traditional Dine welcome. It was left to me to bridge this chasm, to somehow transform enemies into reluctant allies. "The chief has invited you to speak in the council circle," I said to Thornton. "It is a great honor, one rarely afforded to outsiders." In truth, it was a calculated risk. Bringing this armed representative of the U.S. government into the heart of our camp revealed our vulnerability, yet also demonstrated our peaceful intentions and confidence. The central fire had been hastily built up, though it was morning and the flames seemed pale and insubstantial in the harsh sunlight. The elders had assembled, along with the most respected warriors. Grey Willow Woman sat slightly apart, her ancient fingers working ceaselessly at her weaving, even as her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Captain Thornton removed his hat as he entered the circle, a small gesture of respect that I noted with cautious hope. He declined to sit on the ground as was customary, instead perching uncomfortably on a log that served as a bench for the elders. Every line of his body communicated his readiness to leap up at the first sign of trouble. Coffee was brought, a luxury item the tribe reserved for special occasions, traded for at great cost. The fact that they offered it now spoke volumes about the importance they placed on this meeting. I sat between my husband and the captain, physically embodying my role as translator and mediator. The responsibility pressed on me like a physical weight. One mistranslated word, one cultural misunderstanding could spark violence that would destroy everything and everyone I had come to love. "Captain Thornton has come with orders to escort us to Fort Defiance," I explained in Dine, having become fluent enough over the months to handle complex conversations. "From there, we would join the long walk to Bosque Redondo. A murmur of distress rippled through the gathered elders. They had heard the stories of people collapsing from exhaustion on the forced march, of soldiers shooting those too weak to continue, of the barren land that awaited them. Hastien Toahidlini spoke, his deep voice calm despite the gravity of his words. Tell him we know of this place they call Bosque Redondo. Tell him it is a place of death for Diné, no good water, no familiar plants for medicine, no game to hunt. Tell him our children will sicken and die there, our elders will not survive the journey. I translated, softening his words slightly while preserving their essential truth. The captain's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. I understand their concerns, he replied stiffly. But the reservation system is designed for their benefit, to bring civilization, education, and protection from conflicts with settlers. The government provides rations and housing. When I translated this, several elders scoffed openly. One, a respected hunter named Tall Pine, responded with bitter eloquence. We have heard these promises before, he said through me. Food that never comes, or arrives spoiled, houses that leak in rain and freeze in winter, protection that looks like prison walls. Tell your captain we have lived on this land since before his grandfathers' grandfathers were born. We know how to feed ourselves, shelter ourselves, protect ourselves, if only left in peace. For nearly an hour the conversation continued in this vein, the captain repeating government assurances that sounded hollow even to my ears. The elders, countering with specific knowledge of reservation conditions gleaned from relatives and allies who had already endured the long walk. Throughout, Hastien Toahidlini remained largely silent, listening intently. I knew this to be his way, absorbing all perspectives before offering his own wisdom. Finally, as the captain's patience visibly waned, my husband raised his hand for attention. I have heard enough, he said in English, startling the captain. Now I will speak, and Mrs. Wilson will ensure my words are clear. This strategic revelation that he understood some English shifted the dynamic instantly. The captain sat straighter, reassessing the man before him. My people do not wish for war, Hastien Toahidlini continued, his accent thick, but his meaning unmistakable. We have lived peacefully, trading with honest settlers, avoiding those who seek trouble. We do not raid. We do not steal. We simply wish to remain on our land. He paused, allowing me to clarify any points the captain might have missed. The problem, Chief, Thornton responded, is that this isn't your land anymore. The Treaty of 1848 placed this territory under United States control. The government has designated specific areas for Indian habitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt my husband tense beside me, though his face betrayed nothing. We did not sign this treaty, he said simply. How can paper words give away land we have held since the holy people placed us here? The fundamental disconnect between these worldviews struck me anew, one seeing land as something that could be owned, bought, and transferred through documents. The other understanding it as a living relationship, a sacred trust passing through generations. The captain shifted uncomfortably. Those are questions for politicians in Washington, not for soldiers in the field. My orders, your orders, would bring death to my people. Hastien Toahidlini interrupted, his voice still measured but carrying an edge of steel. This I cannot accept. The tension in the circle thickened. Warriors straightened, hands moving unconsciously toward weapons. The captain's eyes darted toward the camp perimeter where his men waited. This was the moment I had feared, the breakdown. Before violence erupted, I placed my hand on my husband's arm, a gesture both intimate and restraining, then turned to the captain. Surely there must be alternatives, I said quickly. A compromise that allows these people to remain free while addressing the government's concerns, Thornton frowned, such as, here was my opening, the narrow path between disaster and possibility that I had glimpsed the previous night. This band has lived peacefully alongside settlers for years, I said. They're known for fair trading, not raiding. Why not allow them to remain here under a special arrangement? I could serve as liaison, writing regular reports to the fort, ensuring compliance with reasonable restrictions on movement, facilitating proper commerce rather than the exploitation that often occurs. I could see the captain weighing this option, considering how it might reflect on him. A peaceful solution would surely earn more commendation than another bloody skirmish that would only create more hatred and resistance. And what guarantee would I have that once I leave, they wouldn't simply vanish deeper into the canyons? He asked skeptically. My presence, I replied without hesitation. My word as an American citizen, and the chief's honor, which I assure you is as binding as any oath you've taken. Hastien Toa Hidlini studied me with an intensity that made my heart flutter. I had ventured beyond what we had discussed, proposing myself as essentially a hostage for my adopted people's good behavior. It was a dangerous gamble, placing me in a precarious position between two worlds that might both come to see me as a traitor. The captain drained his coffee cup, using the moment to collect his thoughts. I'd need something more concrete, he said finally. A written agreement, signed by the chief, stating the terms, regular visits by military patrols to verify compliance, and, he hesitated, a demonstration of good faith. What kind of demonstration? I asked warily. Surrender of excess weapons. Not all. I understand they need to hunt and protect themselves from predators, but any military-grade rifles, surplus ammunition. I translated this for the benefit of the elders who didn't speak English. A heated discussion erupted, with warriors objecting strenuously to disarmament of any kind. Hastien Toa Hidlini listened to all viewpoints before raising his hand for silence. Ask him, he said to me, if other bands would be offered this same choice, or only us. I relayed the question. The captain frowned. My authority extends only to this region, this band. I can't speak for other commanders or other tribes. When I translated this, my husband nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Then tell him we accept, he said, shocking everyone in the circle, with one condition. What condition? The captain asked when I had translated. Hastien Toa Hidlini's eyes locked with mine for a moment, communicating volumes without words, before turning back to the captain. My wife must be allowed to travel to Santa Fe, to speak with newspaper men and government agents there, to tell truth of Diné wishes for peace, to ask for same arrangement for all our people. Without this, temporary safety for one band means nothing. We will not abandon our brothers and sisters to walk alone to the dying place. My breath caught. He was trusting me with the future of his entire people, to be their voice, their advocate in the white world. It was a responsibility that terrified and humbled me. The captain considered this. I can provide escort to Santa Fe, he said finally. What happens there will depend on the territorial governor and other authorities, but I won't prevent her from speaking. After further negotiation of specific terms, including which weapons would be surrendered and how frequent the army patrols would be, we reached a tentative agreement. The captain would return to his fort with a signed document, which I would write, as neither my husband nor the other elders could read or write English, and the surrendered weapons. A small detachment would remain nearby to observe, but not enter, the camp. And in 2 weeks' time, the captain himself would escort me to Santa Fe. As we walked Thornton back to his waiting men, Hastien Toa Hidlini spoke quietly in Diné. You understand what you must do? He asked. I think so, I replied in the same language. Speak for your people. Seek better terms. Try to prevent more bloodshed. Not just that, he said, stopping to face me fully, for perhaps the first time. Since I had known him, I saw naked fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for his people. You must make them see us as human, not savages, not children, not obstacles. Human, with the same hopes and dreams and rights as any other. The enormity of the task nearly overwhelmed me. And if I fail? His hand found mine, our fingers intertwining in that gesture that had become our private language of reassurance. Then at least we will know we walked the path of peace until its end. After Captain Thornton departed with his troubling mixture of threats and promises, the camp erupted into frantic discussion. Some praised the chief's wisdom in finding a bloodless solution. Others condemned him for surrendering weapons and seeming to accept the white government's authority to dictate their fate. Through it all, I felt strangely detached, as if observing the scene from above. In agreeing to travel to Santa Fe, to immerse myself once more in the white world I had left behind, I faced a journey far more perilous than the physical distance suggested. That night, as Hastian Toahidlini and I lay side by side in our Hogan's sleep eluded me despite bone-deep exhaustion. "You're afraid," he said softly in the darkness. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, but not of the journey itself. Of what then? I struggled to articulate the fear that had been growing inside me like a shadow as the day progressed, of returning to that world, of seeing myself through their eyes again, of losing something essential that I've found here. He was silent. For so long I thought he might have drifted to sleep. Then his hand found mine in the darkness. "When Diné warriors go into battle," he said, "they carry stone medicine tied around their necks, small pieces of mountain that remind them of their strength, their connection to this land, no matter how far they travel." I felt him press something into my palm, a small object on a leather cord. "Grey Willow Woman made this for you," he continued. "Turquoise from sacred mountains. It will remind you who you are now, even when white men call you only by your old name." My fingers closed around the stone, feeling its smooth contours, the warmth it had absorbed from his hand. Tears pricked my eyes, not from fear now, but from a love so fierce it bordered on pain. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," I whispered. His arm encircled me, drawing me against the solid warmth of his chest. "You crossed frozen mountains alone. You learned the ways of strangers. You faced armed soldiers with empty hands and a full heart." His lips brushed my forehead. "If anyone can build bridge between our worlds, it is you, Azomon Twahniahi, woman who brings light." In that moment, cradled in the arms of a man from a world I once feared, I understood that my journey had come full circle. I had been abandoned in the snow, left to die by those who should have protected me, only to be saved by those I had been taught to fear. Now I would return to the world that had discarded me, carrying the wisdom and strength of the people who had renewed my life. Whether I could truly build that bridge between worlds remained to be seen. But as I drifted finally towards sleep, the turquoise stone warm against my skin, I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever happened in Santa Fe, my heart would always find its way back to this place, to these people, to the man whose steady breathing matched my own in the sacred darkness. What I couldn't know then was how soon and how severely that certainty would be tested, and how the journey ahead would transform not just my own fate, but the destiny of two peoples locked in, a struggle that had begun long before I stumbled into their story. The journey to Santa Fe began at dawn 2 weeks later, the eastern sky bleeding from indigo to crimson as I embraced Grey Willow Woman. Her ancient hands pressed a small pouch of dried herbs into mine. "For clear speaking," she said in Diné, "steep in hot water before important words must be said." I tucked it into my small bundle of belongings, alongside the turquoise pendant that hadn't left my neck since Hastin Toahedliini gave it to me. My husband stood a few paces away, his face composed in the stoic mask he wore for public moments, though his eyes held a storm of emotions when they met mine. Captain Thornton waited with 6 soldiers at the edge of camp, horses stamping impatiently in the morning chill. I'd exchanged my dîner clothing for the plain cotton dress I'd arrived in, now altered to accommodate the changes in my body after months of physically demanding life. The fabric felt rough against my skin, the cut restrictive after the freedom of deerskin, but appearances would matter where I was going. I needed to look like Martha Wilson again, not as Zomontoani if my words were to carry any weight. "It is time," the captain called, his voice crisp with military precision. I turned to Hastin Toa Hidlini, suddenly overwhelmed by the finality of this parting. Protocol dictated restraint, but my heart demanded otherwise. I stepped forward and embraced him, feeling his momentary surprise before his arms encircled me. "I will return," I whispered fiercely in his ear. "Whatever happens, I will find my way back to you." His hand cupped the back of my head briefly. "I will be watching." "And for you on the horizon," he replied, his deep voice roughened with emotion. "Each day until you return." Then he stepped back, resuming the dignified bearing of a chief before the watchful eyes of the soldiers. I mounted the horse they had provided, a docile mare, easier to manage than the spirited mustangs favored by the dîner. With one last glance at the faces that had become my family, I rode toward a world I had once called my own. The journey to Santa Fe took 4 days, each mile increasing the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Captain Thornton maintained a professional distance, though I occasionally caught him studying me with undisguised curiosity. On the second night, as we camped beneath a vast canopy of stars, his reserve finally cracked. "Forgive my impertinence, Mrs. Wilson," he said as we sat by the fire, his men maintaining a respectful distance, "but I cannot comprehend how a woman of your background could choose such a life." The judgment in his tone chafed against my nerves, already raw with worry about the task ahead. "Perhaps, Captain, that is precisely why understanding between our peoples remains so elusive," I replied, more sharply than I'd intended. "You look at their lives and see only what is absent by your standards, not what is present by theirs." His brow furrowed. "And what, pray tell, is present that compensates for the lack of proper Christian marriage, civilized housing, education, all the benefits of modern society?" I stared into the dancing flames, considering how to answer. This man, with his rigid worldview and unexamined assumptions, represented exactly the mindset I would face in Santa Fe. If I couldn't find words to reach him, what hope had I of influencing governors and newspaper editors? "Dignity," I said finally. "Freedom. A connection to the land and sky that gives meaning to every action. Knowledge passed through generations about how to live in balance with the world rather than attempting to conquer it." I looked up, meeting his skeptical gaze. "And community, Captain. When I lay dying in the snow, abandoned by my own kind, it was the Diné who saw a human being worth saving, not a burden to be left behind." He had no ready response to that, and we lapsed into silence that lasted until we reached the outskirts of Santa Fe. The town hit my senses like a physical blow. After so long in the wilderness, the clamor of wagon wheels on cobblestones, the stench of too many bodies crowded together without proper sanitation, the cacophony of English, Spanish, and other tongues shouting to be heard over the general din, it overwhelmed me, making my head pound and my hands tremble on the reins. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Thornton led our party to the governor's mansion, a sprawling adobe structure that melded Spanish colonial style with American pretensions. I was shown to a small but comfortable room where a copper tub of steaming water awaited my first proper bath in over a year. A Hispanic maid helped me wash my hair and dress in clothes that had been provided, a modest dark blue dress with a high collar and long sleeves, far more formal than anything I'd worn even in my previous life. Looking in a mirror for the first time in months was a shock. The woman who stared back at me was a stranger, her skin tanned to a golden hue, tiny lines fanning from the corners of her eyes from squinting in the desert sun, her once soft hands now calloused and strong. But it was the eyes themselves that had changed most profoundly, holding a depth and gravity that had been absent in the sheltered Boston girl who'd set out for California so long ago. I touched the turquoise pendant hidden beneath my high collar, drawing strength from its solid presence against my skin. The territorial governor, William Watts Hart Davis, received me the following morning in his study, a room clearly designed to impress with its leather-bound books and imposing desk. He was a corpulent man with mutton-chop whiskers and small, shrewd eyes that assessed me like a commodity at auction. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted me with a perfunctory bow, "your situation has caused quite a stir. Captain Thornton's report was most unusual." "I imagine it was, Governor," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the way his gaze made my skin crawl. "Though less unusual than you might think. Many white captives have chosen to remain with their adoptive tribes after rescue, finding the life congenial." His eyebrows rose. "Congenial? Madame, you cannot seriously suggest that primitive existence among savages compares favorably to civilization." And so it began, the battle of words and worldviews that would determine not just my fate, but that of my adopted people. For 3 hours, I parried his dismissals and prejudices with facts and personal testimony, drawing on everything I had learned about Diné culture, governance, and peaceful intentions. "The reservation system as currently implemented will destroy them," I argued, "not just physically through disease and inadequate provisions, but spiritually by severing their connection to the lands that form the foundation of their beliefs and identity." Davis waved a dismissive hand. "These are the growing pains of progress, Mrs. Wilson. The Indian must adapt or perish. It is the inevitable march of civilization. There is nothing inevitable about cruelty masquerading as benevolence." I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. The Diné have already demonstrated willingness to adapt in many ways, trading peacefully, respecting boundaries when clearly established, even adopting agricultural practices alongside traditional herding and hunting. What they ask for is not special treatment but basic humanity, the right to remain on lands that sustain them, under arrangements that respect both their sovereignty and the realities of American expansion. By the end of our meeting, I had secured only a nominal victory: permission to present my case to a committee of territorial officials the following week, and introductions to the editors of Santa Fe's 2 competing newspapers. It was far less than I had hoped for, but a beginning nonetheless. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next days passed in a blur of meetings and interviews, my throat growing hoarse from endlessly repeating the same arguments to men who regarded me with mixtures of condescension, suspicion, and occasionally reluctant interest. Some dismissed me as a madwoman, deranged by my captivity. Others suggested I had been bewitched by savage mysticism. A few, a precious few, actually listened. Ezra Montgomery, editor of the Santa Fe Gazette, proved unexpectedly sympathetic after an initial skepticism. A former abolitionist from Massachusetts, he recognized parallels between the treatment of enslaved Africans and the government's Indian policies. The same arguments were made about the Negro, he mused during our third meeting, that they were inherently incapable of civilization, that their enslavement was for their own good, that their cultures were primitive and worthless. He tapped his pen thoughtfully against his desk. History will judge us harshly for such arrogance. With his help, I composed a series of articles describing Diné culture, governance, and sustainable practices in terms educated readers might appreciate. I was careful to acknowledge legitimate concerns about raids by some bands while emphasizing the peaceful record of others, particularly my husband's group. Most crucially, I outlined a potential framework for coexistence that would respect both Navajo sovereignty and the realities of American territorial expansion. The articles caused a sensation, particularly after being picked up by papers in Denver and St. Louis. Letters poured in, some denouncing me as a race traitor, others expressing cautious support for more humane approaches to the Indian question. Government officials who had previously refused to meet me suddenly found space in their calendars. As the days stretched into weeks, however, my anxiety grew. I had promised to return within a month, yet the bureaucratic pace of territorial government made quick resolutions impossible. Each night I lay awake in my comfortable bed at the governor's mansion, my body aching not for feather mattresses or clean sheets, but for the simple fur pallet beside my husband, for the sound of night winds singing through juniper trees, for the star patterns visible only from our canyon home. The turquoise pendant became my talisman, my connection to a life that sometimes seemed to recede into dream as I was drawn back into the rhythms and expectations of white society. Ladies invited me to tea, eager for titillating details about savage life. Military officers questioned me about Diné movements and strengths, questions I carefully deflected or answered with deliberate vagueness. Through it all, beneath the proper dresses and civilized conversation, I felt myself changing, not reverting to Martha Wilson, but becoming something new. The diplomat I needed to be, to save my people, required elements of both my identities, drawing strength from Diné wisdom and courage while leveraging the education and social understanding of my Boston upbringing. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into my stay when General James H. Carleton, commander of the Department of New Mexico, arrived in Santa Fe. Carleton was the architect of the Navajo removal policy, a hard-faced man whose military successes had convinced him of his own infallibility. His arrival sent ripples of fear through me. If anyone could destroy the fragile progress I'd made, it was this man whose name the Diné spoke with dread. To my surprise, he requested a private meeting immediately upon his arrival. Mrs. Wilson, he greeted me with military brusqueness in the governor's study. Your articles make bold claims about the potential for peaceful coexistence with the Navajo. I find them naively optimistic at best, deliberately misleading at worst. I stood my ground before his intimidating presence. General Carleton, I speak only from direct experience with one band. But that experience contradicts many of the assumptions underlying current policy. What followed was the most challenging conversation of my life, a relentless interrogation about Diné customs, locations, numbers, and intentions. Carleton was no fool. He recognized evasions immediately and pressed harder. Yet neither was he the mindless butcher of Diné stories. Beneath his harsh exterior lay a practical mind, concerned with achieving long-term stability in the territory by whatever means necessary. Your passionate advocacy is admirable, he said finally. But sentiment must yield to pragmatic realities. The Navajo problem cannot be solved through charity or wishful thinking. Not charity, General, I corrected carefully. Enlightened self-interest. The cost of hunting down scattered bands across thousands of miles of wilderness. The military, Resources required to guard reservation boundaries against escape attempts. The ongoing expense of feeding people prevented from feeding themselves. Surely these vastly exceed the cost of establishing and enforcing fair boundaries on traditional lands. That argument, financial rather than moral, caught his attention in a way my humanitarian appeals had not. "Continue," he said, his expression thoughtful for the first time. For 2 more hours we debated, each possibility examined from multiple angles. I drew maps showing proposed zones where Dene could maintain traditional lives while remaining distant enough from white settlements to minimize conflict. I detailed how my role as liaison could ensure communication and early intervention before minor tensions escalated to violence. By the end, though he made no firm commitments, I sensed a shift in his thinking, a willingness to consider alternatives to the brutal simplicity of forced relocation. As he rose to leave, he fixed me with a penetrating stare. "You realize, Mrs. Wilson, that your unusual situation places you in a precarious position. There are those who would consider your loyalties treasonous." A chill ran through me. "My loyalties are to humanity, General. To finding solutions that don't require either side to be destroyed for the other to thrive." He nodded curtly. "A noble sentiment. Whether it's a practical one remains to be seen." At the door he paused. "I'll need time to consider these proposals and consult Washington. 2 weeks. In the meantime, I suggest you consider carefully where your true allegiance lies." The implied threat hung in the air long after he departed. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. I had been in Santa Fe nearly 7 weeks, far longer than promised. What was happening at the camp? Had the military patrols maintained the respectful distance Captain Thornton had agreed to? Was my husband still watching the horizon each day, or had he concluded I had abandoned him for the comforts of my former world? Dawn found me pacing my room, torn between duty to continue the diplomatic fight and the desperate longing to return home. As the first rays of sunlight spilled through my window, a sharp knock at my door jolted me from my thoughts. A military orderly stood outside, his face grave. "Mrs. Wilson, General Carleton requests your immediate presence." "At this hour?" I asked, alarmed by the urgency. "Yes, ma'am. It's a matter of some importance." Heart pounding, I hastily dressed and followed him to the governor's study, where Carleton stood by the window, his back rigid with tension. He turned as I entered, his expression confirming my worst fears before he spoke a word. "There has been an incident," he said without preamble. "A patrol encountered a band of Navajo 40 miles northwest of here. Shots were fired. There are casualties on both sides." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "My husband's band?" I managed to ask. "We don't know. The survivors have been brought to the fort infirmary. I thought you might identify them." The ride to the fort passed in a blur of dust and dread. Each hoofbeat seemed to echo the same terrible question. Had everything I'd worked for, everything I'd come to love, been destroyed in a moment of misunderstanding or malice? The fort infirmary was a long, low adobe building smelling of blood and carbolic acid. 4 Navajo men lay on simple cots, their wounds bandaged, their faces drawn with pain and fear. I scanned them desperately, relief washing through me when I didn't recognize any as being from my husband's band. "You know them?" Carleton asked, watching me closely. I shook my head. "They're from a different band. Northern, based on their moccasin style." I approached the nearest man, speaking in Diné. "I am Aszomontoa Niahi, wife of Chief Flowing Water. Can you tell me what happened?" The wounded man's eyes widened at my use of the language, then narrowed with suspicion. "Why does white woman speak with Diné tongue?" I touched the turquoise pendant, drawing it from beneath my collar. "I am Diné by marriage and choice, though not by birth. I seek peace between our peoples." Seeing the pendant, recognizable as the work of a respected Diné craftsman, his suspicion softened slightly. Haltingly, he described how their hunting party had been confronted by soldiers who demanded they surrender their weapons. Misunderstanding or mistrust had led to violence, with 3 Navajo and 2 soldiers dead before the survivors were captured. As I translated the account for Carlton, omitting some details that would only inflame tensions, an orderly entered with an urgent message. The general read it quickly, his expression darkening. "It seems this incident wasn't isolated," he said. "Grimly, reports are coming in of skirmishes across the territory. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. My blood ran cold. I need to return to my husband's band immediately. They'll be vulnerable if fighting is spreading." Carlton studied me for a long moment, his internal calculation almost visible behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "I'll arrange an escort. But understand this, Mrs. Wilson. What you've proposed, this middle path between cultures, may no longer be possible if full-scale conflict erupts. You may be forced to choose a side definitively." "I've already chosen," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I choose peace. I choose survival. I choose a future where neither side must be destroyed for the other to exist." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then I hope for all our sakes that you can convince others to make the same choice." 2 hours later, I was riding west with Captain Thornton and 12 soldiers, pushing our horses as hard as we dared across the unforgiving landscape. 3 days of hard travel brought us to the canyon where I had left my heart nearly 2 months. Before, it was empty. Where the Hogans had stood, only circular patterns in the earth remained. The central fire pit was cold, filled with wind-blown sand. No voices called in greeting, no children ran to meet us, no smoke rose from cooking fires. "They're gone," Thornton said unnecessarily, dismounting beside me. "Appears they left in haste, but not in panic. No signs of violence. Relief warred with renewed anxiety. They had fled deeper into the canyonlands, following contingency plans long established for times of danger. But where exactly? And how would I find them with a military escort that would likely trigger further retreat? As twilight deepened the shadows, I made my decision. "Captain, I need to continue alone from here." "Out of the question," he replied immediately. "My orders are to ensure your safety." "And you've done so admirably," I assured him, "but they won't reveal themselves with soldiers present, you know that." He frowned, torn between his orders and the logic of my argument. "General Carlton was explicit." "General Carlton wants peace restored," I interrupted. "That can only happen if I reach my husband's band before more blood is shed. I know these canyons now, I know where they might have gone, but I must go alone." After further argument, we reached a compromise. Captain Thornton and his men would make camp nearby, close enough to respond if I signaled with gunfire, far enough that their presence wouldn't alarm the Diné. I would take 1 horse, basic supplies, and a pistol, then follow the trails only a tribe member would recognize. As darkness fell completely, I changed from my traveling dress into the Diné clothing I had insisted on bringing along, not just for practicality in the wilderness, but as a visible symbol of where my loyalties lay. The familiar weight of the deerskin felt like armor against the uncertainties ahead. "Be careful, Mrs. Wilson," Thornton said as I mounted my horse. "Whatever you may believe, these are dangerous times. Even your husband may not react as you expect with war brewing." I touched the turquoise pendant at my throat. "Thank you for your concern, Captain, but I'm going home. That's the one place I know I'll be safe." With those words, I rode into the gathering darkness, guided by stars that seemed to welcome me back to their domain after too long beneath plastered ceilings. Each hoofbeat carried me farther from the world that had once been mine, closer to the one I had chosen. Whether I would find my people, whether I could still bridge the widening chasm between 2 worlds determined to destroy each other, whether The fragile diplomatic progress I'd made would survive the rising tide of violence. These questions hovered like shadows at the edges of my mind. But as I followed the secret paths of the canyon lands, one certainty burned brighter than all doubts. Whatever trials lay ahead, I would face them not as Martha Wilson, not even solely as Azzomontoaniahi, but as the woman I had become through love and loss, through snow and fire, through walls built and bridges burned. A woman who had found her true home in the most unexpected of places. The moon rose over the towering mesas, casting silver light across the ancient landscape. And somewhere ahead, I knew my husband watched the horizon, waiting for my return. I touched my heels to my horse's flanks, urging her forward into whatever future awaited. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.